for such a long time.
Reggae did not come from a studio, it came from survival. And the artists who built it, many of them never got their flowers. Some were robbed, some were forgotten, some died too soon, but the music never lied.
Oh yeah, it is you.
10 artists, decades of truth, and at least one name on this list will change everything you thought you knew. This is the Rolling Stone Top 10 Greatest Reggae Artists of All Time. Stay with us. Number 10, Toots and the Maytals. Close your eyes for a second. It is 1969. Kingston, Jamaica. The air is thick and hot. Somewhere down the road, a sound system is rattling zinc fences. And out of a small studio, a man opens his mouth, and out comes a voice so raw, so full of soul, that the engineers just stop and stare. That man is Frederick Nathaniel Hibbert. The world knows him as Toots. Pressure Drop is not just a reggae song. It is a warning, with a spiritual promise that whatever you put into the world is coming back to find you. The lyrics hit you like a sermon from a preacher who has been through something real. Produced by Leslie Kong at Beverly's Records in Kingston, that groove is so perfectly placed it sounds just as alive today as it did 50 years ago. Now here's something a lot of people do not know. Toots personally named this entire genre. In 1968, he had the Maytals released a song called Do the Reggae. That word right there became the name of the music. He did not just play reggae, he named it. The song reached global audiences through the 1972 film The Harder They Come, and was later covered by The Clash, introducing it to a whole new generation. But even with all of that, Toots spent decades in Bob Marley's shadow. Not because the music was lesser, but because the industry only had room to market one Jamaican face at a time. Toots kept going anyway, right up until COVID-19 took him in September 2020 at age 77. The world lost a giant, but Pressure Drop will never die. And if number 10 already has you feeling something, wait until you hear where this goes. Number 9, Steel Pulse, Handsworth, Revolution. This one is personal for a lot of people over 45 because this song did not come from Kingston, it came from Birmingham, England, and that matters more than you think.
The people of Handsworth.
Mid-1970s, a group of young black British kids, sons and daughters of Caribbean immigrants, growing up in Handsworth, one of the most deprived areas in England.
So, let's join hands, my brethren.
Racism is not subtle there. It is written on walls. It is in the eyes of police officers. And out of that pressure, Steel Pulse is born.
This message across, been hidden, forbidden, concealed on.
Their 1978 debut album, Handsworth Revolution, released on Island Records, is one of the most important records in British music history. Not just reggae, British music history. The title track builds slow like storm clouds rolling in. Vocalist David Hines is not singing about Jamaica. He is singing about the streets outside his front door.
Justice stands for all.
Police harassment, invisibility, fighting for dignity in a country that told you every day that you did not belong.
Down, crowning us, crowning us, crowning us.
The fun fact, when Steel Pulse first played live in Birmingham, they wore Ku Klux Klan costumes on stage as a deliberate provocation to force a conversation about British racism that nobody wanted to have. That image shocked people. That was the point.
Babylon is falling.
In 1986, they won the very first Grammy Award for Best Reggae Album for Babylon the Bandit, a British reggae band from Birmingham. First time the category ever existed. They won it.
Justice stands for all. Does not justice stand for all?
Why? But Handsworth Revolution got buried over time because reggae from outside Jamaica was often treated as imitation, even when the music was as powerful as anything coming out of Kingston.
A place of evil.
That bias was an injustice, and this countdown refuses to repeat it. Number 8 is somebody who beat every single odd that was ever stacked against him. Number 8, Yellowman, Zungu Zungu Gu Zungu Zeng. Yes, that is the name of the song. Say it 3 times fast. Go ahead. We will wait. Now, when you are done laughing, let me tell you the real story behind the most unlikely superstar in Jamaican music history. Winston Foster was born in 1956 with albinism in Jamaica, in a culture where that condition carried tremendous stigma. He was abandoned as a child. Grew up in an orphanage, and spent his early years being called names, being dismissed, being told in every possible way that he was not worth anything, and then he picked up a microphone. What happened next is one of the most remarkable comebacks in music history. Except it was not even a comeback. It was a first arrival. Yellowman walked onto the dance hall stage in the early 1980s and turned every insult he had ever received into fuel. His delivery was sharp, funny, bold, and absolutely relentless. He talked his way to the top of Jamaican music at a time when the dance hall scene was just beginning to overtake roots reggae in the charts. Zungu Zungu Gu Zungu Zeng dropped in 1982 and became a sound system weapon. That rhythm, heavy, rolling, irresistible, was impossible to ignore. Yellowman built a persona that was equal parts comedy and genuine swagger, and it worked. At his commercial peak in the early 80s, Yellowman was outselling Bob Marley in Jamaica itself. That is not an exaggeration. That is documented music history. He was the first Jamaican dancehall artist to sign a major label deal in America. With CBS Records, he performed at the Sunsplash Festival year after year and owned those crowds like nobody else could. Here's the part of the story that very few people bring up. In 1986, Yellowman was diagnosed with cancer of the jaw. Doctors removed a significant part of his jaw in surgery. Most people thought his career was finished. He came back anyway. He kept recording, kept performing with a reconstructed jaw because that is who Yellowman is. His music faded from mainstream attention as dancehall evolved through the late 80s and 90s. Newer sounds and newer artists pushed him to the back of the conversation, but his influence on every DJ artist that came after him, from Shabba Ranks to Beanie Man to Vybz Kartel, is undeniable. He did not just survive, he set the blueprint.
King Yellowman!
Make some noise, Cali Roots.
And the next name on this list built something even deeper. They were part of people's lives, part of their love stories, and their heartbreaks and their memories of being young. That is the kind of artist you have to be to earn the #1 spot on any list like this. Not just successful, not just talented, essential. Number 7, Burning Spear, Marcus Garvey.
Live and direct one more time. Yeah, roots and culture.
This is not party music. This is not something you throw on in the background. Marcus Garvey is a spiritual document, a piece of living history, a track that sounds like it came from somewhere deeper than a recording studio. Winston Rodney, born 1948 in St. Ann's Bay, the same parish that produced Bob Marley, chose the name Burning Spear as a tribute to Kenyan independence leader Jomo Kenyatta. That tells you everything about who this man is. And he is not here for the crossover audience, he is here for the truth. The 1975 album Marcus Garvey, produced by Jack Ruby and released on Island Records, has a sound unlike anything else from that era. Slow, wide. The bass sits so heavy, you feel it in your spine. The song is a tribute to Pan-African leader Marcus Garvey, and a whole generation learned who Garvey was because of this track. Rolling Stone placed the album on their 500 greatest albums of all time list. Fun fact, the album was recorded twice. The original Jamaican version and a re-recorded London version for international release. Both exist. Both are worth your time, but the original has an urgency that the polished cut cannot fully replicate. Burning Spear won Grammy Awards for Best Reggae Album in 1999 and 2008 and was still recording and performing well into his 70s. But outside reggae circles, most people have never heard his name. History owes Burning Spear a much bigger conversation, and it owes the next artist on this list a serious apology. Number 6, Sizzla, Praise Ye Jah. Miguel Orlando Collins was born in 1976 in Augusttown, Kingston, raised in the Bobo Ashanti House of Rastafari, one of the most disciplined spiritual orders within the faith. And everything about his music reflects that. The commitment is total. The fire is real. Praise Ye Jah from his 1997 debut album announced to the reggae world that something different had arrived. His voice carries an intensity that feels almost dangerous. Over 60 studio albums later, no other reggae artist comes close to that level of output with that level of consistency. Fun fact, Sizzla recorded so prolifically in the late 90s and early 2000s that some albums were released without his knowledge. Producers were sitting on sessions and putting them out when demand was high. He has spoken about this publicly with genuine frustration. Now, his career also carries significant controversy. And what we know for certain is that the controversy pushed talented artists further from mainstream platforms, away from festival bookings, distribution deals, and the access that helps music reach new audiences.
Praise Jah, Hail the Emperor, Selassie and your King.
Whether you agree with how it was handled or not, an entire chapter of Jamaican music became harder to access as a result. Several artists signed the Reggae Compassionate Act, a pledge to stop recording such content. The sincerity of those pledges was debated for years. On Sizzla's relationship with that pledge has been publicly complicated. What did not change is the music, the output, the influence on modern reggae and hip-hop that producers and artists have acknowledged directly. That is the record this countdown reflects on. The full story is complicated, the artistry is not. Number 5, Dennis Brown, Here I Come. There are singers, and then there are singers who make you feel like they wrote the song specifically for your life. Dennis Brown was the second kind. Born in Kingston in 1956, he started recording at 11 years old. His voice had a warmth that was almost impossible to describe. Sweet, controlled, perfectly placed. Like someone opened a window and let clean air into the room. Here I Come, a year produced by the legendary Joe Gibbs, walks the line between lovers, rock, and roots reggae in a way that few artists could manage. Tender without being soft, heavy without being crushing. Bob Marley himself called Dennis Brown the Crown Prince of Reggae. When the king gives you that title, it means something real.
My head is anointed, and my cup.
Brown's UK following was enormous. Lovers rock audiences in London treated his records like sacred texts. In 1981,
goodness and mercy shall follow all the days of my life.
Here I Come reached the UK mainstream top 50, a genuinely significant crossing of lines for a reggae artist at that time.
Goodness and mercy shall follow all the days of my life.
But Dennis Brown died in 1999 at just 42 years old. A collapsed lung connected to drug use took him far too soon. The industry moved forward. Dancehall was dominant. And the Crown Prince of Reggae became a name that newer generations simply never came across. That is one of the quiet tragedies of this music. Number 4 changed everything for a whole different reason. Number 4, Jimmy Cliff, The Harder They Come. Have you ever watched a film and felt the music so deeply that you could not separate the two? Like the song and the story became the same thing. That is what this record does every single time. James Chambers was born in 1948 in Somerton, Jamaica. He moved to Kingston as a teenager with practically nothing and found his way into music on sheer will. The 1972 film The Harder They Come, in which Cliff starred as the lead, became the cultural moment that carried reggae to international audiences before Bob Marley became a household name. Film scholars and music journalists agree on this. Jimmy Cliff opened the door that Marley walked through. The song, produced by Leslie Kong, is a desperate, defiant declaration that you will either make it or die trying. Audiences felt it as autobiography, even when it was not. Here is the fun fact that still stings. Jimmy Cliff was offered management by Chris Blackwell at Island Records, the man who later turned Bob Marley into a global superstar. Cliff turned it down over creative differences. Marley signed instead. The rest is history. And Cliff spent years watching the infrastructure he helped build carry another artist to a level he had been positioned to reach himself.
One more time.
But he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2010, one of only 2 reggae artists ever honored that way. His contribution to this music is enormous.
And if you're looking for another way, let the music in your...
His name recognition outside reggae circles is nowhere near what it should be. That gap between contribution and recognition is the part of this story that never gets easier to sit with. Number 3 took that same sting and turned it into fire. Number 3, Peter Tosh. Legalize it.
I will advertise it.
There is Fearless, and then there is Peter Tosh. Winston Hubert McIntosh was born in 1944 in Westmoreland, Jamaica. He came to Kingston, linked up with Bob Marley and Bunny Wailer, and together they built the Wailers.
Some of them call...
But Peter Tosh was not built for compromise. He was not built for softening or careful packaging. He was built to say exactly what he meant at full volume in front of whoever was listening.
Legalize it, yeah.
Legalize It came out in 1976. His debut solo album after leaving the Wailers, a direct, unapologetic argument for marijuana legalization, produced alongside Lee Scratch Perry and delivered with the calm confidence of a man who has already decided he does not care what you think. In 1976, that was not a casual statement, that was a political act. The album was immediately banned from Jamaican radio, which, as it always does, made people want it more.
Don't you criticize.
Then came 1978, the One Love Peace concert, and Bob Marley famously brought rival gang leaders onto the stage in a moment of symbolic unity.
And it even cures glaucomia.
But Peter Tosh used his stage time to lecture Prime Minister Michael Manley, who was sitting in the audience directly, face to face, in front of thousands of people. He talked about police brutality.
So you better legalize it.
About poverty, about what the government was failing to do. Reports from people who were present say Tosh was beaten by officers shortly after the concert. He spoke about it in interviews without softening a single word. Some people say he was wrong to use that moment that way.
Okay.
Others say he was the only honest person on that stage. On September 11th, 1987, Peter Tosh was murdered at his home in Kingston during a robbery. He was 42 years old.
It's good.
Nothing brought him back. Nothing gave the music world back what it lost that night. Legalize It was not just a song. It was a statement of exactly who he was and who he refused to stop being. Number 2, Bunny Wailer, Blackheart Man.
For even lions fear him. To get the black heart man.
This is the one most people get wrong. When people talk about the Wailers, they talk about Marley, sometimes Tosh, and then the conversation stops.
If you could let me go out and play.
Bunny Wailer, born Neville O'Reilly Livingston in 1947 in 9 Mile, Jamaica, childhood friend and neighbor of Bob Marley himself, gets left at the edge of the story.
He's the black heart man. Even in
That is one of the most consistent injustices in all of music history. His 1976 solo debut Black Heart Man is, without exaggeration, and one of the most spiritually complete reggae albums ever recorded.
Time that is filled with you.
Critics who have spent decades studying this music place it alongside Exodus and Marcus Garvey as a true masterpiece. The title track has a quality of deep stillness, like early morning, before the world wakes up.
Just like the Black Heart Man, y'all. Just like the Black Heart Man.
Bunny's voice turns inward where Marley's reached outward, like he is trusting you with something private. Produced by Bunny himself on Island Records, the album arrived as the Wailers were fracturing.
Let me go out and play like little children.
And Bunny had already decided his principles would not allow him to keep touring internationally. He walked away from the commercial machinery that most artists would have sacrificed anything to access.
He's a Black Heart Man, y'all.
Fun fact, despite refusing to play the industry's game, Bunny Wailer won 3 Grammy Awards for Best Reggae Album. In 1990, 1995, and 1997, the music spoke for itself even when the man would not speak for it.
People get blamed without a reason.
He passed away on March the 2nd, 2021 at 73 years old. When the last founding member of the Wailers was gone, and with him, the last living witness to where all of this began.
Equal under the sun, all that is created by Jamaican.
Black Heart Man never got the airplay it deserved, but for the people who find it, really find it, it changes them. Which brings us to number 1.
All right, C-Trends fam, let's keep it real. We're pouring our hearts into bringing you the best celebrity news and music deep dives. What? Check it. A massive 98% of you aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is how you can truly support us, helping us grow and create even better content. If you're vibing with what we do, take a sec to hit that subscribe button. It's free and makes a huge difference. Plus, ring that notification bell so you never miss out. Let's flip that 98% and build this C-Trends family together. Your support is everything.
Number 1, Bob Marley, Redemption Song.
Minutes after day took I from.
You knew this was coming, and that is exactly the point. Robert Nesta Marley was born on February 6th, 1945 in 9 Mile, St. Anne Parish, Jamaica.
Won't you help to sing another song?
Son of a white British plantation overseer and a black Jamaican woman, he grew up between 2 worlds, fully belonging to neither, and somehow found a way to speak to all of them.
While we stand aside and look, some say.
Redemption Song was released in 1980 on the album Uprising, one of the last songs he ever recorded, just an acoustic guitar. Just his voice, no band, no production layers, just the words and the music sitting there needing nothing else.
All I ever have. Redemption.
The instruction at its heart, to emancipate yourself from mental slavery, came from a real speech by Marcus Garvey. Marley took that political philosophy and made it personal.
Won't you help to sing another song?
Something you could hear alone in a quiet room and feel was written just for you. His album Exodus was named Album of the Century by Time magazine in 1999.
The time, how long shall they kill our prophets?
What his greatest hits compilation Legend has sold over 28 million copies worldwide. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1994, and he did all of that by the age of 36. Bob Marley was diagnosed with cancer in 1977. Doctors advised immediate amputation of his toe where a tumor was discovered. He refused on religious grounds. He kept recording, kept touring. Kept giving performances that people still talk about in hushed voices decades later. On May 11th, 1981, on a flight from Germany back to Jamaica, Bob Marley died. He never made it home. 36 years old, with a catalog that most artists could not build in 3 lifetimes. Redemption's song is #1 not because of charts or sales or critical rankings. It is #1 because it is the piece of music where Bob Marley stripped away everything except the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, has always been enough.